All right, y'all. I just left a viewing of Sinners, the new Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan film, amongst a bunch of other all-star casts. Amazing film. I raced home just to make sure that I could get my hot take off. So this is going to be from memory with a little help from Wikipedia just to follow chronologically the plot. Spoiler alert. If you don't want spoilers for the film, do not watch this video. This is your time to swipe and go off. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Amazing film. Like, Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler do not miss ever, but this might be the best film they put out so far. I've watched a lot of horror films, and this several times had a lump in my throat. Like, it's just a beautifully made film of just not only the aesthetic, but the spirit and the almost the visceral experience that is like the Black Southern experience, especially the Black Southern experience that is only roughly 3 to 4 generations away from enslavement. But before I get into all that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my hot take just to get this party started. And again, forgive me, this is from memory. I just left the theater with a little bit of help from Wikipedia. I had to jot down notes. So here we go. One thing I really enjoyed about this film is that it's obviously a horror movie, but the horror doesn't really start until the last third of the movie, not even half. And that's my recollection. Like, the last third is when it starts getting into the vampire stuff. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit. But like 2/3 of the movie is just straight up like a beautiful a Black Southern drama. It's basically what it is. So if you're going in expecting like it to be horror, like after the first 30 minutes up into the ending, a lot of it is actually a lot of background story, a little bit of lore, and just like general character building. And then it gets into the vampire stuff. My hot take. My hot take is that this film is about epigenetics and passing down trauma. Epigenetics is the study of how cells control gene activity without changing the DNA sequence. It explores how the environment and other factors can influence how genes are expressed. Usually the pivotal book for this sort of discussion is My Grandmother's Hands. Check that out. That's usually the book that people talk about when they want to talk about trauma being passed down by generations. So let's go chronologically, and I'm going to tackle the themes and plot points that support my thesis. So again, thesis, Sinners is about the passing down of trauma. So the film takes place, according to Wikipedia, in 1932, clearly post-World War I, because the twins explain that they were fighting Germans, and then there's a scene where they talk about how they've always defended each other all over the world. So I'm assuming this means that they had traveled to they were in different assignments during World War I. So this is post-World War I at least, but apparently the setting is 1932. Now, the film opens with Lil Sammy. Lil Sammy's father is a pastor. Lil Sammy's father wants Lil Sammy to help with the sermon on Sunday morning. Now, what's interesting is that we're already diving into this idea of intergenerational trauma, because the father wants Sammy to stop playing blues. He wants Sammy to use the guitar to play only church music. Sammy's father was actually encouraging Sammy to play the guitar for church. I thought this was interesting because right then and there, it's already talking about the Black community's concerns and reservations about the Christian church. It's a pitting against the secular world and the Christian world in the Black community. I will give Coogler credit for not pitting a future character, 80s hoodoo and Christianity, against each other. To my understanding, there's some traces of history that shows there's a lot of resemblance or similarities between the two. But I do appreciate how in this film that really is celebrating Blackness and the diaspora and generations of Blackness didn't pit hoodoo and Christianity together. Although they don't necessarily work together, they're not pitted together. But yes, so that scene already sets up this idea of this generational trauma between the secular world and the church world, and this like divide into that. So later on, they continue on this theme of like music and music inviting the devil into your life. Lil Sammy's guitar plays on an essential part of the story. So there's this one scene where when Smoke and Stack, so Smoke is the blue twin and Stack is the red twin. And Stack and Smoke are both coming into Mississippi from Chicago, and they decide like we're going to start recruiting for our grand opening for the juke joint. While Stack is driving around Lil Sammy to recruit folks for the juke joint, Stack tells Sammy that the guitar he's playing and has been learning to play was actually won in a card game from a famous blues player in Chicago. This is important to the ending because Sammy believes that this guitar is from this famous blues guitar player. And so it's really important to him and he wants to keep it. Now, again, going in chronological order, as the twins recruit the other folks for opening night, we meet Mary, and Mary is Stack, the red twin. Mary is Stack's lover. Now, it's later revealed that Mary is of mixed race lineage. Wikipedia says that she's 1/8 Black, but in the film, and again, off of memory, she says that my father's mother was mixed. Point being, her grandparents were biracial. And so she alludes that she sees herself as a Black woman. She passes for white, but this idea that this character, Mary, is of mixed race lineage is Stack's lover, and it's alluded to that they wanted to go off and build a family together, have children. Stack reveals later that he completely pushed Mary away because he feared for Mary's safety, and he didn't want Mary to be killed, murdered, assaulted, shunned, whatever, for being with a Black man because she passes as white. So there's that, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Now, Annie, who I mentioned earlier, is a hoodoo practitioner, and it's revealed that Annie consistently prayed roots to protect Smoke. Now, this is an important line because the next line right after that is Smoke rebuffing hoodoo practice and the praying of the roots, because Smoke says, if you prayed so much to protect me, why didn't you protect our baby? So it's already revealed. And even earlier, there's a scene where Smoke is going to a makeshift offering. It may have even been a gravesite because you see rock with a handprint and you see some offerings. I think it's like maybe milk or sugar, maybe some herbs. So it's revealed that Annie and Smoke were to have a child together, and the child somehow, some way passed away. So there's that. Now, on the drive back to the juke joint, because they've been recruiting all over town, Stack and Smoke split up to cover different duties of getting opening night together. So on the drive back to the juke joint, Stack, after he has this conversation with Mary, Stack gets back with Delta Slim. And Delta Slim is a blues pianist. And Stack is taking Lil Sammy, Delta Slim, and another person who's later going to be the bouncer. Delta Slim sees who I'm going to call survivors of the 13th Amendment. And he tells Stack to slow down, and he stands up on the car, and he tells him, keep your head up. Projects his voice and says, keep your head up. Stack is, what was all that about? Do you know them? And Delta Slim says he knows all of them. Now, I think at face value, the audience is supposed to think that like he somehow really does know all of them. But I think it's actually like an insightful way of saying like, we are all one, especially in the context of the setting, again, only being 3 or 4 generations away from enslavement or Reconstruction. Point being is that Delta Slim is saying he knows all of them. And then he goes on to mention about a time where he was almost, and again, I'll put it this way, a survivor of the 13th Amendment. But it's this idea, again, of community and trauma and generations, the generations of trauma passing down. So this idea that Delta Slim knows all of them is this idea that we are one, and touches on an element of Blackness, especially in this time period that is bonded and intertwined by trauma. Later, we also meet the antagonist, Remick, and Remick is very clearly and obviously an Irish immigrant vampire. We'll pause there because we'll come back to him later, because his opening scene is just very much him just being a vampire. Now, once we finally start to get to opening night, and there's a lot in between where I'm going, I'm really only touching the parts that I feel like support my hot take. So we finally get to the juke joint. It's opening night. The party's already started. We're having different scenes about how to run a club and be new club owners. new juke joint owners. There's this really amazing scene where Lil Sammy is eventually invited to perform. And as Sammy is playing the blues, the actor just does an amazing job. The song is beautiful. The song is amazing. And a narrator all of a sudden shows up and explains that it is said that there are those who have the power to conjure spirits of past and present through their music. And then that whole scene comes out of nowhere. And it's all of this like Black generational diaspora all coming together in the juke joint to share their music. As soon as Lil Sammy starts playing and singing, like funk artists and b-boys in this juke joint, 90s DJs and 90s rappers, Bloods and Crips playing cards and rolling dice in the gambling room, which is also an interesting callback because Slim and Stack are twins and Stack wears red and Smoke wears blue. But this idea of all these different generations in music genres of Blackness like coming together in this one room because Sammy apparently has this power to conjure spirits of past, present, and future through his music. Now, although this scene in and of itself isn't spelling out the passing of trauma, we know that Black music, even in its diversity of sound and energy, often comes from a place of pain. Gospel, for instance, a lot of people don't think about gospel as necessarily coming from a place of pain, especially because of the lyrical subject matter, most songs. But it's something my auntie used to always say. My auntie used to always say that we praise and worship the way we do. I grew up Koji, by the way. So if you've grown up Koji, then you know how Koji people praise and worship. And my auntie used to always say that we praise and worship that way because we be going through it. So we come to church on Sundays to let it all out, to do your testimony, to pray, shout, fall out, all that good stuff. And this is not like a video to talk about the Black church. The point I'm making is how this scene is encapsulating this idea of how we are all one and how the music can come from a place of trauma. For example, even like rap and hip hop has several academic analysis from various prestigious professors talking about how hip hop is a reaction to surveillance, the carceral state, poverty in the necropolis or the city of the dead, and all other music in between. It's interesting that I have that analysis because Delta Slim even comes out and says it in a sidebar scene with Lil Sammy. And Delta Slim says this music, and he's referring to the blues, this music came from us. It wasn't imposed on us. From my analysis, this film is about the passing of trauma, and this music scene explains that. Because again, I feel like the vampire stuff wasn't really until the last third of the film. So before we get to the vampires, I want to note that Smoke takes Lil Sammy aside. They're actually like upstairs. Smoke and Sammy are on the balcony. And Smoke tells Sammy that night is going to be the last night that he will ever invite Sammy to play at the juke joint ever again. Of course, Lil Sammy doesn't like that. Lil Sammy argues up and down, talks about how this is what he wants to do for the rest of his life. He wants to play music, sing songs, sing the blues. But Smoke says that he needs to go play music for the church. And then he mentions there's this part of Mississippi, Port something. And long story short, he says this area is where the good Black people stay. Smoke replies that he and Stack were kicked out of that community because the people in that community felt there was no way that their father's evilness could not be passed down to Smoke and Stack eventually. So they feared Smoke and Stack for what they could become based off of the habits or the epigenetics or the trauma that would be passed down because of the father. Throughout the movie, Smoke and Stack kind of hammer home that their father was like a POS. Now we're getting to the vampire. Now, most of the vampire scene time, for the purposes of horror, of course, is mainly used to taunt, antagonize, and strike fear into the heroes. My thesis regarding the last third of the film isn't quite spelled out. However, there is one point where Annie is the hoodoo practitioner. Annie believes that these creatures are hate. At least that's what I thought she was saying, because obviously I didn't have subtitles or anything. So hate, like this is a creature or manifestation or personification of hate. Now, I don't know if that was supposed to be like synonymous with demons because she's a hoodoo practitioner. She doesn't necessarily believe in demons. And I don't know if that's what she calls demons as hates. My hot take is that the film was about trauma and the vampires are the vehicle or the representation of passed down trauma. What's interesting is that after they find out that these are actually vampires, and Annie is familiar with vampires, Annie says that vampires are the worst type of creature because they are unkillable and you always have to kill them one by one. You can't just kill one and they all die. What's interesting is she says that, but the lore of these vampires of this universe is that they share a hive mind. They all can gain the memories of each other. They all have a hive mind. They can all feel what Remick feels, and they all have this awareness of having each other's memories. Now, not only does this play on the idea of passing down trauma just on the surface, because if you're passing down memories or sharing memories to people, and regardless of the immortality and the age and generation of vampires, this idea of passing down memories to someone as you kind of exchange blood, DNA, epigenetics, memories, trauma, it's all coming together to meet. Remick uses this ability to convince people or to have them like at least have their guard down so he can convert them into vampires. So with Remick, he tells Mary that he can sense like this pain and anguish that she's feeling and she's carrying. Now, he may be able to feel emotion. He says that he can sense the pain and anguish that she is carrying. And she only reveals that her mother had just passed. She had just buried her mother. But we as the audience know is that she's also probably holding a lot of that generational trauma of like her blackness. And she alludes that she is forced to pass as white and to live as a white woman because Stack essentially told her to go away and he didn't want to have anything to do with her. He didn't mean that, as he later reveals. He was doing it for her safety, but this idea of that she has this resentment towards Stack, and part of it is because she feels now she's forced to be a white woman when she wants to participate in her blackness. Remick later goes to the whole group of heroes and says that becoming a vampire is the only way to rid themselves of systemic racism. He says that being a vampire is not only saving themselves from systemic racism, but it's living amongst each other in immortality. He goes on this speech about how like they will never let y'all move up to be better, to do better. And he illustrates this by like revealing that the juke joint that Smoke and Stack had purchased was actually a trap by the local clan to later come and essentially kill everyone in the juke joint. The other vampires co-sign that with Remick, and the reason Remick knows that is because one of the first people he converted was the nephew of the grand wizard of the clan in that city. Everyone co-signed this because they all share each other's memories, and the vampires agree that this is the only way to navigate systemic racism. This is the only way to do it, and to basically to live in this like vampire commune for the rest of their lives. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is juxtaposed when Annie later tells Smoke that Smoke needs to promise to kill her if she's ever bitten and to not let Smoke himself get bitten because they both have someone waiting for them in the afterlife, which is their aforementioned child who died. And so it's this idea of living forever to beat or navigate systemic racism, trauma, or really, I guess, being dead forever because they lean into that these vampires are dead and that their souls are locked to never leave. And then there's the juxtaposition from the hoodoo practitioner who says, actually, like our spirits go somewhere where our ancestors are. So it's just this interesting juxtaposition there. Fast forward to another scene where it's revealed that most of the attendees of the party have been turned into vampires, and they all began singing and dancing with Remick with what seems to be a traditional Irish song. I don't know if this is supposed to stamp that Remick's motive is to collect Sammy's music so he can just have a bunch of different artists who will play a bunch of different music for the rest of their lives in their little vampire commune, or if this is supposed to be like a symbolism of colonized and imperialized communities, or if it's just supposed to paint Remick as this all-powerful vampire who can control the hive mind himself. I don't really know what that scene was. I'm sure it was much more than just being creepy and to taunt the heroes, but I just found it interesting that scene happened. Most of the community we thought had escaped the situation completely turn against the protagonist. It's just harrowing, and especially even the way it shows up. Now, we're almost at the end. So after the climactic battle, Smoke tells Sammy to get rid of the guitar from here on out. Smoke probably says that because Remick definitely says it clearly one time that he was drawn to the juke joint because he heard Sammy playing and singing the blues. Now, obviously, this is, the advice that Sammy's dad gave Sammy, saying, don't play that guitar, don't play that blues music, don't play that juke joint music, because you're going to invite the devil. So Smoke is probably saying that Sammy needs to get rid of the guitar because Remick said that's the only reason he showed up that night. However, Sammy replied that he won't give up the guitar because Smoke and Stack won it from that famous blues player back in Chicago. This is when it's revealed that the guitar belonged to Smoke and Stack's father. Stack lied. He didn't win it from a famous guitar player. It's actually Smoke and Stack's father's guitar. And that line, that moment revealed to me, again, my hot take is that this movie is about the passing down of generational trauma. And the vampires represent that. But then, when this line came out, it was just like, Remick and the vampires couldn't have cared about Sammy's music that much. Like, maybe you want a diversity of music if you're going to live forever, sure. But I feel like that line was put there because when it's revealed that the guitar, which again, Remick said was the only reason he stopped by the juke joint that night, was, for me, it immediately thought that these people were not victims of circumstance. They were victims of the sins of their father, specifically the father of Smoke and Stack. Because again, it's revealed that people thought that the twins' father was so evil, there's no possible way that evil wouldn't be passed down. Trauma, epigenetics, generational trauma. I feel like it's all screaming at you at the end. To me, I feel like it's screaming at you at the end. So when we get to the title of the film, Sinners, it's a play on words because Sinners, this idea of that, oh, it's a juke joint, they're drinking and sweating and gyrating and getting drunk and fornicating in the juke joint. But no, it's not. The people at the juke joint aren't the sinners. The vampires are attracted to the sins of their fathers, attracted to the generational trauma. The guitar being the artifact of generational trauma, which the vampires were led to. And that's my take. Amazing film, 10 out of 10, would recommend. Probably one of my favorite films of all time.